If someone told you a war could be won without lifting a sword, would you believe it? Sounds crazy, right? And that's exactly why you need to hear Gideon's story. While most people rely on numbers, weapons, and titles, this story flips the script. A tiny army of just 300 men armed with trumpets, torches, and clay jars. Yep, that's what they used to face a massive enemy army and win. But this isn't just a story about strategy. It's about calling. That moment when God picks someone unlikely at an impossible time to do the unthinkable. Gideon was weak, full of doubts, hiding from life, and still he was the one God chose. Why? Because heaven isn't looking for the ready, it's looking for the willing. And maybe, deep down, you felt that call too, but didn't think you were capable of answering it. This story shows you don't need to be the strongest, the smartest, or the most prepared to live something extraordinary. All it takes is one step of trust. Even if you're shaking, even if you're scared. Because faith isn't about feeling brave. It's about obeying even when everything around you says otherwise. And the ending? You'll be amazed. If you had seen Gideon that day, you probably would have walked right past him. No heroic aura, no warrior stance. Just a regular guy hiding in a pit, threshing wheat in a wine press. Scared, skeptical, and definitely frustrated with life. It was a scene of defeat, but God doesn't see like we do. He sees the invisible, what's still waiting to bloom. And in that setting, where no one expected anything, the calling happened. Heaven spoke where the world saw only silence. God shows up through an angel and drops a bold title on him, Mighty Warrior. Just imagine that contrast. A man trembling in fear being called mighty. But that's the key. God doesn't define you by how you feel right now, but by what He's already planned for your life. So let me ask you, how many times have you disqualified yourself thinking you're not ready, strong, or good enough? Gideon felt the same way, and that's exactly why God chose him. It wasn't a mistake. It was purpose. It's like God saying, I see beyond the mirror, and the same goes for you. Sometimes we wait for life to be perfect to start walking in faith, but God calls us right in the middle of the mess, in the pain, in the doubt. Trust is born when we finally admit we can't do it alone. When we stop pretending to be strong and offer our weakness instead. That kind of surrender, raw and honest, creates space for the supernatural to move. That's how the story of this unlikely man began, in an impossible time, with a non-negotiable calling. But things around him were even darker than his own fears. The problem wasn't just personal, it was national, and the weight of that moment. Well, here's what it looked like. Israel was in crisis. No safety, no peace. Not in the streets, not in the fields, not even in people's hearts. The Midianites destroyed everything: food, shelter, dignity. A people who once watched the Red Sea part were now hiding in caves, as if they had never known a powerful God. This kind of trauma runs deeper than the body. It crushes the soul, eats away trust, and erodes faith. Hope doesn't die all at once. It suffocates, slowly, day after day. Imagine waking up every day expecting to lose. That was Gideon's life, threshing wheat in secret. Not because he was a coward, but because it was the only way to survive. The whole nation was in survival mode. No dreams, no boldness, no direction. And when a people lose the will to fight, they lose their identity. Fear becomes normal. Faith becomes a memory. But even then, even in the shadows, God saw it all. And it's not much different today. A lot of people live like Israel, hiding on the inside, hiding wounds behind smiles, hiding doubt behind rehearsed religious phrases, hiding exhaustion behind packed schedules, deep down feeling abandoned, like God turned His face away. But Gideon's story proves he never leaves. He's just waiting for the right moment to step in. And that moment usually comes when pain has already taught us everything it can. So if you're in your own wine press, hiding from the world, just trying to hold it together, listen. That's exactly where God showed up. He doesn't need spotlights, just a sensitive heart. And right there, in that fear-filled hiding place, Gideon had an encounter that would change everything. In the middle of a hopeless routine, something supernatural happens. An angel appears and calls him Mighty Warrior. Picture it. He's hidden, working in silence, trying not to get caught. And suddenly hears that. His first reaction isn't praise or joy, it's doubt. He says, if God is with us, why is all this happening? And let's be honest, who hasn't asked that question? But the angel doesn't give a theological explanation. He gives a mission. Go in the strength you have. Strength? What strength? Gideon didn't see any, but God did. Because when heaven calls, it's not based on your current state. It's based on the destiny God's already written. God sees the seed long before there's even a hint of a tree. Gideon didn't believe in himself yet, but heaven was already moving. And that shows something big. God's call doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It shapes you along the way. Still, Gideon, like most of us, asks for a sign, some proof, and God, in his patience, gives one. Gideon brings an offering, lays it on a rock, and the angel touches it with his staff. Fire consumes it on the spot. It's like God was saying, "It's me. I'm here." And listen, asking for a sign doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And God never turns away a sincere heart trying to understand what's happening. And right there, between reverence and doubt, something shifts in Gideon. That encounter sparks a new vision, a new journey, a new identity. But the next step? That would mean facing something even harder, the altar that stood inside his own home. Gideon's first mission wasn't against a foreign army. It was against something much closer, idolatry in his own backyard. God tells him to tear down the altar of Baal, not just anywhere, but in his family's yard. Just imagine the tension. This wasn't just breaking stones. It was breaking traditions, confronting culture, disrupting comfort. Gideon obeys, but at night, in secret. Was he scared? Definitely. But he still did it. And that was faith in action. This moment carries a powerful symbol. We often want to change the world but refuse to touch the altars we built ourselves. Toxic habits, relationships that pull us from God, desires that take the place of faith. Gideon was called to free a nation, but that freedom began in his own home. So let me ask you, what needs to be torn down in your house, in your heart? Because before we can win on the outside, God calls us to realign what's inside. The people's reaction was predictable: outrage. They wanted to kill Gideon, but something surprising happened. His father, Joash, stood up and defended him publicly, and that moment sparked a shift. The man who once hid in a pit was now a point of reference. His quiet courage started to echo. What was once rejection turned into inspiration. Sometimes initial opposition is just the soil where true leadership grows. And what looked like a one-off act started spreading fast. People began seeing Gideon differently. From a fearful nobody, he was becoming a rising leader. But no one could have guessed what would happen next. An army would form around him, and the weight of responsibility would come crashing in. What began with a torn-down altar became news across the region. Gideon's boldness awakened something long buried in the people's hearts: hope. Suddenly, men from different tribes started showing up, ready to fight. In no time, 32,000 soldiers were standing with him. It's amazing how one genuine act of faith can attract others. Gideon didn't launch campaigns or give speeches, he simply acted on faith, and that was enough for others to rise. But then God steps in again, and his message is basically, there are too many people. Too many? Wouldn't more soldiers be better? From a human perspective, sure, but God wanted one thing to be clear. This victory wouldn't come from military strategy. It would come from total trust in him. How often do we crave security through numbers, money, support? And God responds by cutting things back. He wants the glory to be his, and that often starts by removing what makes us feel self-reliant. Gideon obeys. First, anyone afraid could go home, and 22,000 leave. Then, another test: how they drink water. In the end, only 300 remain. Logic would say, it's over, no chance. But that's when divine logic kicks in. God doesn't need many to do much. He just needs hearts that are available, sensitive, and ready to obey. And Gideon, the guy who once doubted himself, now stood in charge of a small group with a massive mission. This was a turning point. From leading thousands, Gideon was now tested as a leader of a few. And this new phase would demand more than bravery. It required faith with no safety net, and full trust in a strategy that, honestly, sounded absurd. Now the scene could almost be comedic, if it weren't so serious. Gideon, with just 300 men, gets a battle plan from God that sounds more like theater than warfare. Trumpets, clay jars, and hidden torches. No swords, no tactical ambush. If this happened today, leadership experts would call him completely unprepared. But when the orders come from heaven, they don't have to make sense to men, and they don't need to. The goal was clear: spread panic and confusion. At the sound of the trumpets, the sudden light of the torches, and the crashing jars, the enemy would turn on themselves. And that's exactly what happened. But before the miracle came, there was a silent test. Gideon had to trust God's instructions without questioning. That proves something powerful. True faith doesn't rely on logic, and it just obeys. Faith that sees is common. Faith that acts in the dark, that's rare. And that's the kind that moves heaven. How many times does God give us instructions that seem ridiculous? Apologizing first even when you know you're right. Giving when you're in financial trouble. Letting go of something the world calls a golden opportunity. But it's those simple, spirit-led steps that produce amazing results. Today's trumpet might be a persistent prayer. The clay jar could be your broken pride. And the torch, that's the fire of God's presence burning inside you, even in your darkest night. Gideon accepted the plan. His men got ready. And when night fell, victory was about to be declared. But it wouldn't come in any normal way. What happened next would reveal the power of trust that triumphs through chaos, and of a faith that moves without seeing the end. It was time. Night had come, dark and quiet. The 300 men stood positioned around the enemy camp. They weren't carrying shiny armor or heavy weapons, but they had something unseen: confidence. When they blew the trumpets, shattered the jars, and raised their torches, the Midianite camp exploded in panic. The enemies, confused, started attacking each other. It was complete chaos, just as God had said it would be. What we see here is a victory born not from strength, but from obedience. Not one of the 300 had to fight with a sword at that moment. They simply followed God's instructions to the letter. And that's one of the biggest lessons in the whole story. When you do your part with faith, God does his with power. It doesn't matter if the strategy seems weird or unlikely. If God gave the order, it's going to work. And when the victory comes, no one questions who deserves the credit. But Gideon didn't stop there. He chased down the kings Zeba and Zalmunna, showing that faith isn't just about waiting for miracles. It's about acting with determination. A lot of people pray for freedom, but never go after the things that still threaten their purpose. Gideon chased them down, finished what he started, and handed everything over to God. That proves mature faith isn't passive. It's committed, persistent, and deeply responsible. No miracle replaces a posture of spiritual maturity. The victory was massive. The people were free, the enemy defeated, and not a single sword was needed at first. But then, something strange started happening. The people, overwhelmed with admiration, wanted to make Gideon their king. And with that, his greatest test was yet to come. After such an epic win, the people were thrilled. They saw Gideon as the ultimate savior. If he did all this with just 300 men, imagine what he could do as our king. That was the buzz. And once again, Gideon surprises everyone. He refuses the throne. He says firmly, "I will not rule over you, and neither will my sons. The Lord will rule over you." What clarity! What humility! He knew the glory wasn't his. Real power didn't lie in crowns. It came from God's presence. But then Gideon slips up just a little. He asks for some of the gold, the spoils of war, and uses it to make an ephod, a special priestly garment. Maybe his intentions were good, a memorial, a symbol of faith, but the outcome was tragic. The people started worshiping it, turning it into an idol. And that's when you realize, even spiritual-looking things, if not surrendered to God with wisdom, can become traps. The human heart is quick to replace God with symbols. That part of the story reveals something deep. It's not enough to reject the throne if you're still chasing recognition in other ways. Gideon turned down the title, but maybe deep down, he still wanted validation through that ephod. And that's as real today as it was back then. How many times do we say it's all for God's glory, but secretly hope for applause, status, or a little spotlight? Real trust doesn't crave trophies, not even holy ones. It's content to serve quietly, without needing to be remembered. The people, dazzled by the victory, took their eyes off God. The faith that saved them was replaced with worship of the object, not the one who gave the victory. And that small shift, it started a painful cycle, because when the glory doesn't go all the way back to God, the human heart always ends up lost. So let me ask you this: how long will you keep thinking you're not enough? If God chose Gideon at the worst moment of his life, how many more times will you ignore the call because you're waiting to feel ready? The truth is, God doesn't need giants. He needs willing hearts. And if he used clay jars and trumpets to tear down an army, Imagine what he could do with your life if you just say yes. Are you hiding too? Just surviving? Not really living? Then maybe this story isn't just a story. Maybe it's a mirror. So what's stopping you from tearing down your own altars and truly trusting? Is it fear? The past? Other people's opinions? It's time to stop postponing the faith you already know you need. Start with small decisions. A prayer today, a step of faith tomorrow. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be available. And now, I want to hear from you. Where in your life do you feel God is calling you to trust Him more? Drop a comment below. Tell me. Your story could be the start of someone else's transformation too. Oh, and if this message spoke to you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Here, we walk together story by story, building faith and learning from God's Word. Because when we understand what He did in the past, we start to see what He wants to do today.